Here is a motion picture film. Let's tidy up this tangle of film by putting it on a reel.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Film Swap. My name is David Seeley, and this most ecstatic gaucho is in fact the ecstatic gaucho himself, Mr. Jonathan Pritchard Barrett. Jonathan, how are you doing? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Yeah, welcome to 2024.
Yes, it's been a while since we've done the whole Film Swap thing, isn't it? We've had a bit of a Christmas break, haven't we?
We have. It's been, there's so much going on at this time of year. So
Indeed. But it's great to see you and great to be back. Did you have a nice holiday?
I did. Yeah, it was good. We had the mother-in-law over and dashed around doing things, and it was good. Really nice. Thank you.
Brilliant.
How about you?
Yeah, we had a lovely time. We went, myself and the family, we went to Andorra for a skiing holiday.
Wow, that sounds nice.
So it was very nice. We had a very lovely week of skiing and eating ridiculous amounts of food.
Delicious Andorran. That's like Spanish food or like French food?
Yeah, well, there was all kinds of different stuff. Yeah, kind of. Andorra's kind of in between France and Spain, isn't it? So it's kind of like a little bit of a cross between. But it was lovely. Yeah, we had lots of lovely food, lots of lovely meals.
I can imagine.
Yeah, it was lovely. It was a nice time.
No avalanches.
No, there was no. I didn't run off to leave the kids to get buried by any avalanches or anything like that. Happily, there wasn't a lot of snow at all, to be honest. So a lot of the piste and stuff were closed.
Oh no!
So because the weather was quite mild, but it was nice. It was
good. Good. You got away anyway, so that's good.
Yeah, and I'm happy to be back. Watching and talking about cool films.
Definitely.
Which is what we're all about.
It is.
So did you want to tell the listeners today about what we're going to be talking about today? Our episode is called Compromised Classics.
Compromised Classics. Well, we're all about classics at the Film Swap, and these are two classics that have been compromised. Basically, they're considered classics, and they were the sort of handed in by the directors to their studios, and then the studios didn't like the look of them at all, and they got out their big scissors, their machine, and they basically re-edited them drastically. So the classics were sort of like because half of it's gone, but not more than half of it. A substantial part of it's gone. So we're sort of looking at the sort of the remnants of these amazing films, basically. So yes. I've got one and you've got one.
Well, and they're films that are both still very, very good and very, very interesting and well-regarded films, but they're also films that we don't really have access to see them as they were intended by the filmmakers. We're seeing compromised versions of them, and unfortunately, it's a bit of a tragic story. I mean, this is a tragic story both on and off screen because both films are kind of tragic stories, but were very tragic stories for the filmmakers themselves because they were both kind of labors of love that ended up being severely truncated by the studios, and then subsequently, they both their careers kind of were seriously affected by the outcomes of these films as well, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. They were. So the sort of the promising directors never quite lived up to their promise after this because they got these bad reputations of directors who'd made films that the studios had to butcher, basically.
Yes. They
quite a
were,
sad thing.
and the thing is, they like, because obviously at this time of year, it's kind of the beginning of a new year, and most people are kind of looking forward and thinking about, what this year is going to be like. But we're kind of looking at kind of what might have been films, really, and
Yes.
what might have been careers. Because, I mean, Eric von Stroheim, we're talking about for Greed, and Orson Welles for the Magnificent Ambersons. And
Yeah.
these are two of the, great major creative figures of the 20th century. But
Yeah.
in both cases, we don't know what their lives and their careers, what directions they would have taken, and what kind of films they would have made, and what sort of things would have happened going forward.
Yeah.
Um, uh, if these films had been better received or perhaps shown as they were intended originally. So,
Yeah. That's true.
how's that for a subject? Woo!
Well, it's quite. I mean, I suppose we touched on it before with Napoleon, haven't we? Because that was a film that was sort of chopped down to size. Um,
Mm,
but luckily, with Napoleon, there's a lot more footage left of the original than with certainly with Greed. Well, both of them, I think.
yeah. Well,
There's,
Napoleon was kind of unfinished, like for the first section, Abel Gance, and then
yeah.
was unable to complete the project as originally envisaged,
Hmm.
uh, just because of how expensive uh, the first section turned out to be.
Yeah.
And also, it's been lost over time. So the version that we have and that we talked about in that episode, Napoleonic Wars, um, still available wherever you find your
Yeah.
favorite podcasts, folks. And that film uh, it doesn't exist in the original version as intended by Abel Gance either. It's been
No.
sort of pieced together over the years. But we did talk briefly about the fact that the uh, French Cinematheque are working on a new restoration, which
Yeah.
we would hope would bring us to more of what the original premiere version of the film looked like.
No.
In the case of both Greed and Magnificent Ambersons, though, unfortunately, the uh, the footage that had been removed no longer exists, or at least nobody knows where it is. If there is still some film cans sitting around somewhere,
Hmm.
they are lost. Currently, nobody knows where their whereabouts or if they still exist.
No.
And I think as the years go by, it becomes less and less likely that we're ever going to see the footage found, and reinstated.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is a great shame. Great
But
shame.
we can talk about each one individually in a bit more detail.
Yeah.
So I think we were going to do this kind of chronologically, and we're going to start with Greed, which
Yep.
was my pick. What happened was actually during the holidays, I did have a bit of downtime, and this was one of the films that I chose to watch. I watched it on Apple TV, and I looked at it, and then I immediately, as I finished watching it, I said, "We got to talk about this on Film
Ah,
Swap."
ah, ah.
And
Yeah.
so I immediately, when I touched base with you after the new year, I said to you, "Shall we do a show about greed?"
Yeah.
And then you immediately then countered with the Magnificent Ambersons, which is a perfect in terms of thematically, subject wise. They both fit together very, very well.
They do. They do. Yeah. It's quite funny actually. It's, birds of a feather, aren't they?
So, shall I introduce Greed? I
You
guess
please
because it was
introduce
my
me.
film.
Yes, absolutely.
So yes, Eric von Stroheim. He was an Austrian who came to America
Yeah.
in the early parts of the 20th century and found himself ultimately working in the film trade. And apparently, he had a small part in D.W. Griffith's Intolerance, and he also had lots of other bits as an actor in various silent films.
Yeah.
And then he eventually worked his way into writing and directing his own films.
Yeah.
And it was, he built himself up a career, and he made, and not a lot of his early films still survive, unfortunately, but there are a few that are still around. But the predominant one was Greed. And even at the point that he made Greed, the film was, he had a bit of a reputation for kind of going over budget and having quite extravagant and lavish productions. He had an incredible attention to detail, and he was quite particular about, the costumes and the sets and everything had to be just so. And so he, at this point, he already had kind of a reputation for being a bit of a problematic in terms of from the business side
Okay.
of the film for the film producers and studios.
Yeah.
So he got to do Greed, which was kind of like a dream project for him to adapt a book called McTeague, which
Okay.
was written by Frank Norris. And it was an 1899 novel,
Right.
quite epic in scope. And this is one of the first feature films that was predominantly shot on location as well. That they reckon this might be the first film that was shot on location,
Right.
because von Stroheim, rather than being confined to a studio and
Yeah.
making sets, they actually shot everything in actual very specific locations,
Right.
including in Death Valley in California, which is um, uh, a very unhospitable place
Yeah.
during certain times of the year.
Yeah. Especially
So,
when cameras back then were like gigantic, and everything
yes,
all their equipment was definitely not very portable at all.
yeah, there was no guerrilla filmmaking in these days because these
No.
things were like the size of, small trucks and weighed a ton, and they had, the hand cranking and all this kind of stuff. Although I don't know if they had motorized film cameras by this point or not. But
Okay.
anyway, so he got to make this film, and it was a massive undertaking, and he adapted the film quite faithfully, and he
Right.
filmed all the portions of the novel. Uh, but ultimately, he turned in a film that was like about 8 hours long. So from a commercial point of view, I
It's quite
think
long.
the chaps at MGM were kind of like, dude, this is maybe like a bit much. We're going to have to think about what we're going to do here. So von Stroheim went back and he re-edited the film down to about sort of something like, I can't remember. It was sort of like about 6 hours or 4 hours or something. But
Okay.
still, in those days, it was still considered a little bit ambitious to have a film that long. And ultimately, they took the film away from him, and they
Yeah.
recut it down to 2.5 hours or something like that. Or no, I think the released version runs about 2 hours and 10 minutes. Is that right? Something like that.
Is it okay? Yeah.
I believe so. And
Right.
yeah, I'm 1 hour or sorry, 140 minutes.
Yeah.
So that's 2 hours and 20 minutes long.
Okay.
So to be cut it down from 8 hours to 2 hours and 20 minutes is quite, that's losing quite a bit.
Yeah.
To,
That is
to be
losing
fair.
an
So
enormous amount.
yeah, so naturally, obviously von Stroheim was unhappy with this, and
Yeah.
he disowned the film, and he was heartbroken. And
Yeah.
although he did make a few films after that, like The Foolish Wives and things like that, that were
Right.
relatively successful. I
Yeah.
don't think his career ever really recovered. I think he did eventually sort of burn his bridges in terms of a directing career, and he predominantly, after that, worked as an actor,
Yeah. That's right.
sometimes in Hollywood, but quite a lot in France as well. I believe he's in The Grand Illusion with
Yes.
Louis
Yes. He plays a
Armstrong
great German
and
officer.
some many others. So he's he's quite a recognizable face, I think, for people who like to watch old films. He
Yeah.
pops up quite often in villainous roles or things like that, or kind of parodies of himself.
Yeah.
as a maniacal director and
Well,
Aristocrats. He played a lot of sort of
yes.
you know
In the
characters.
Grand Illusion, he's a sort of aristocratic German officer,
Yeah,
and but it sort of played with a certain amount of humour,
yeah,
and
yeah. It's a wonderful film, Grand Illusion. I love it. I actually just rewatched it just before Christmas. I had rewatched that
right,
actually,
it's a
and
terrific movie.
it's such a great film.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, when you look at pictures of Eric von Stroheim, he's sort of looking severe, but you almost think, is this a piss take? Is he pulling our leg? Uh,
Yeah,
and so a little bit like his character in The Grand Illusion, it's sort of he's very severe, but he's also is a bit of a he's sending it up. He's sending up the sort of
mm,
Teutonic severeness or Teutonic
yeah,
severity or something like that.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I think he probably kind of was playing up a bit to the sort of the character that he'd be like, the kind of personality that he was associated with. And I
Yeah,
think you're right. In some cases, there he was sort of playing that up a little bit,
yeah,
and um, yeah, but I mean, he did become quite a recognizable face as an actor, but I don't think he
yeah.
ever really sort of recovered his. He didn't have as many opportunities after that to direct films.
No,
Um, Greed
yeah,
itself, I mean, I guess I could hand over to you. I've really just maybe talked a bit about the background of the production, just kind of a
yeah.
general overview of the history of the film. But I don't know if you want to tell us a little bit, Jonathan, about the story of Greed.
I will do my best of summarising the 4 hour film that I watched.
Well, it should be noted that Greed, the 2 hour and 20 minute version that I mentioned was the original theatrical release version that ended up being exhibited commercially
Yeah,
in the United States and presumably other countries as well.
yeah,
In 1999, Turner Broadcasting, who at the time owned the majority of the MGM library,
okay,
um, released a reconstruction of the film, but that version still just has that 2 hours and 20 minutes of footage. And then it reinstates the missing scenes that had been cut from the film. But what they do is they use production stills
right,
from that were taken during, the filming,
okay,
and
yeah,
then they kind of cut them in to just have a visual representation of what the scene would have looked like. But
right,
they are, in fact, still photographs. And then they still had a copy of the script with all of the intertitles and things. So they
all
kind
right,
of cut the film together as best they could,
yeah,
but using these still photographs. So to someone who went into it watching that version without sort of understanding a bit about the background of it,
yeah,
I think that can be a bit jarring because the it goes from a moving picture to suddenly just panning across still photographs, a la
yes,
Ken Burns,
ha,
and then with these sort of intertitles put into so that you can kind of follow the story along. So
yeah,
what that version does is it kind of reconstructs a little bit more about what Stroheim's original vision for the film would have been,
yeah,
but it isn't that because they all of the footage is lost and
yeah,
presumed lost for good. So we're probably never going to see the film as was intended. But what that film does is, I think the producer of that particular version called it he said it was mainly meant as more of a study version for sort of
okay,
film students and things like
oh,
that,
really,
so that they could get some sort of a idea of
right,
what the original version of the film would have been like.
okay, interesting,
So that is basically, so people, if you're out there, you can see Greed. It's because it's now in the public domain. The theatrical version is in the public domain, and it's so you can watch it on YouTube and
yeah,
various other places for free online. But if you rent or purchase the version that's available on the streaming platforms like Apple and Google and YouTube or whatever it is,
Yeah.
that is the reconstruction version. So it runs to about 4 hours,
Yeah.
and it is that version with the production stills cut in to
Right.
replace the missing scenes.
Yeah. I watched the longer version, the study version, you could say.
Yeah.
Maybe I should have stuck to the sort of, edited one. Because it sort of does. I mean, it's interesting to see that, and it does have the titles, so you sort of do get a bit more of the story. But it
Mm.
does. It's like it's just a little bit annoying, and I'm sure Eric von Stroheim would be even more annoyed than me to see that his film had been sort of basically lost, and he were getting these sort of stills instead. But and it sort of slightly takes you out of it. But anyway, the story. So the story is of this guy called what's his name, McTeague, and it starts off in a gold mine somewhere in the redwoods in California,
Mm.
and it's a sort of hard work. I think it's in the 1890s, and basically, from what I can remember, this dentist turns up, and the dentist is great. He has this sort of Caponian sort of cart type thing, and dangling off it is a gold tooth. And I wonder if that was an influence on Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained, because there's a dentist in that, and that has a tooth on the top of the cart, which sort of on a spring that sort of like bounces around quite
Mm.
amusingly. A similar looking tooth. You can see the sort of roots. Anyway, but so his mum says, the mum of McTeague says to the dentist, "Could you take him on as apprentice?" And off he goes with him, and he ends up in San Francisco, and where he works as a dentist in Polk Street. So sort of basically fairly respectable, I think, like from what I can gather. So it's not like a sort of side street. It's like on one of the main drags, and he's successful. And then his friend is a chap called what's his Marcus Schuler, or Mark Schuler, and his friend Mark is engaged to Trina, and he basically McTeague sort of says, right, can I start wooing Trina,
Mm.
and so he does, and they get married.
Yeah, it should be pointed out that the chap who's dating her is actually her cousin.
Cousin,
They're
yes.
cousins.
Well, I guess that's quite
So
a Victorian thing, isn't it? That people were married
yeah,
cousins.
yeah. You perhaps don't see that so much nowadays, but I think back then it was. And I mean, I'm just completely. I have no factual sort of basis to say this, but I suspect that that was a little bit more common in those days. That
I'm pretty
people,
sure it was, yeah.
yeah. So
So they get married, and basically soon afterwards, she
like he
wins.
gives her up. Sorry, we should just
Yes,
clarify that this chap basically gives her
Marcus.
up
Yep.
so that McTeague can court her instead. So
Yes.
as a friend, he just kind of says, "Well, she obviously means more to you than she does to me. So
Yep.
I'll stand aside and let you have her, basically,
Exactly.
for lack of a better term."
Exactly. So soon afterwards, he wins. Basically, she wins some money in the lottery, £5,000, which back then was an enormous amount of money.
Mm.
And
Especially to people in their economic sort
yeah,
of circles, like $5,000 would be quite a significant sum of money. Yeah.
yes, exactly. And they so he wins this money, but basically the idea is you get that from the title that there's a lot of greed. So he wants some of her money, but she won't give it to him, and in fact, she doesn't want to spend it. So essentially, they live this sort of slightly impoverished life because she doesn't want to touch her nest egg, which is
Yes.
hidden away.
She gives kind of new meaning to the word of being a like a tight what's the phrase
Right, what?
being
Tight fisted.
yeah tight-fisted, yeah, like she literally becomes obsessive about not spending any money at all,
Yeah,
even though they that she has this $5,000.
Yes, exactly. And so basically everybody in the film is greedy,
Yeah,
pretty much. And eventually he gets found out that it turns out that he doesn't have a license from the California Dentistry Association or whatever it is to practice as a dentist, because he's picked it up from this guy, like a sort of snake oil salesman from the olden days, from the Wild West, because that's sort of when it
yes,
is set
yeah.
in the 1890s, where he just sort of picked up dentistry, you just yank that one out, that's fine.
Yeah, he kind of learned it more as like as an apprentice,
Yeah,
but not officially from a registered sort of institution or anything like
exactly.
that. He just sort of hung around with the guy and picked it up, learned how to do it.
Yeah. So then he loses his job because he's not allowed to practice anymore, or at least people don't come to him anymore.
Yeah,
But she won't help. She's basically, no, I'm not going to spend my precious £5,000. And so they end up moving to sort of more and more sort of worse accommodation from their slightly sort of comfortable surroundings at the beginning, and eventually, well, it all goes horribly wrong without telling you too much
yes.
at the end. Uh, but there's
No,
this
that's good. 'Cause, yeah, we don't. If people are going to watch it, we want to make sure that there's some surprises and stuff in store for
exactly.
them in the
But
plot.
there's a subplot with this guy Zerkow or Zerkov, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, who's a
Mm,
sort of a scrap merchant or junk man, and
mm.
I couldn't quite figure that one out. And then there's another
Well,
subplot.
it's interesting. I think that's a good way to talk about the differences between the two versions of the film, because the released version of the film,
Yeah,
essentially the way that they managed to cut down this giant girth of film
yeah,
down to a more manageable size was that they excised a lot of the kind of subplots within the
okay,
film,
yeah,
because the film doesn't just concentrate on McTeague and his wife and that circle there. They also talk a lot about the other people who live in the boarding house where they live at the beginning,
yes,
and then subsequently some of the other characters that live in the neighborhood.
yeah,
And so a lot of this kind of material is kind of covered in that longer reconstructed version of the film.
mm,
But if you see the shorter release version of the film, a lot of that's gone.
okay,
They just sort of stick to mainly McTeague and the wife and that central story arc.
yeah. But even although watched a longer one, I wasn't really sure what was going on there with Zerkov and his wife. And there's this
Well,
other
there was an
guy.
additional, like a lady who worked for McTeague, sorry, in the dentistry office as like
Oh,
just a general cleaner or something, and
yeah.
she seemed to have some sort of like mental health problems or something, and
Okay.
she had some sort of a relationship with this kind of, I don't know what he was, some kind of junk dealer,
Yeah,
antiques kind of
yeah,
person who ran this sort of shop selling just sort of, I don't know if it was pawned items or what it was, and
yeah,
but she seemed a little bit mad, and she was always talking about this cache of gold plates that were buried. She
ah,
knew where they were buried, and they were belonged to her family, and
yeah,
there was a whole subplot around that sort of relationship that was built on this premise that this woman knew where there was a stash of great wealth stashed away somewhere, and
yes,
only she knew where it was.
yes. That was it. That
Yeah,
was it. Yeah. So that's
yeah,
another aspect of greed, I suppose, as well.
yeah.
Um,
And
yeah,
then there's a nice subplot about this old couple who live
yeah,
in the house, and they live in adjoining rooms,
yeah,
but they both live alone. Like one of them's a spinster, and the other one's just sort of a longtime bachelor, and they're sort of getting up there in years, and they're in love with each other,
yes,
but and they literally live next door to each other with just a wall that separates them, but they never declare to each other their feelings for one another,
yeah,
and they sort of both admire each other from afar,
yeah,
and that's another sort of story that runs through runs through it,
Yeah,
and there's one or two other little
I like
subplots
that
and
one
things.
because that's the most sort of hopeful and sort of innocent story of the lot. I guess the rest of them all
Mm.
more uh,
Yeah.
less happy.
Well,
Yeah,
yes, I think the general feeling of the film is a little bit of a downbeat film, and as you say, I mean, it's called Greed, and it sort of shows many different sort of manifestations of greed throughout all these different characters and all these different intertwining stories
yeah,
that sort of give various ways in which greed manifests itself.
exactly. And
Yeah.
the one thing I wanted to say is that it's not just a black and white film; it's a black and white and gold film. Because
Yes.
periodically in the film you see these sort of gold coins, and
Yeah.
each frame of the film had been tinted, apparently by Eric von Stroheim himself, to make it look to make it gold coloured.
Mm.
And later on in the film, there's a fourth, well, another colour that appears, a second colour, I suppose. But I'm not going to tell you what that one is. I'm not going to tell the listeners what that is. But I guess your imagination will probably take you there. It's not a happy ending.
Yes. You'll have to watch it, folks. You'll have to go and check it out for yourself.
Exactly.
Uh,
Yeah.
so okay, well, that's a great sort of summary of quite a. I mean, it's quite a daunting task to summarize Greed, I think, which is perhaps one of the reasons why I passed it over to you. uh, but but it is, in fact. I mean, so what did you? What are
Well,
your overall impressions of Greed? What did you think of it?
I guess. I mean, I guess one thing was it's just quite long because I watched a long one, 4 hour
Yeah.
one, and any 4 hour film is because I had to break it up. I broke it up into three bits, so I suppose
Mm.
that's one of my thing. And I guess I did enjoy it, but I did get because it's so long and it's around this time of year. I was sort of I did struggle with it a bit. Let's put it like that. And especially because I'm having to watch it at night when I'm sort of like flagging anyway. And
Mm.
uh, after going to a few sort of silent films live, I slightly feel like silent films should really be um, appreciated best with somebody on a piano tinkling away, as well as sort of rather than just sort of in a on your screen at home. And so I guess that was one of my thoughts. But yeah, I mean it's good. You've got all these characters have got sort of they're good and they're bad. I guess there's no real sort of goodie or baddie. They're sort of they're flawed, which is a
Mm.
nice quality in a character, I think. And I mean, I took an immense amount of notes on what was going on. Yeah, it's got some. Yeah, I was yeah, that's sort of my initial impressions that it was good, but a little bit long, maybe. What were your thoughts on it?
Well, I mean, I really quite enjoyed it.
Yeah,
Found it quite fascinating,
yeah,
and I guess I mean, first of all, I didn't watch it at nighttime. I watched it actually. I watched it over two sittings, and because there is an intermission in the middle,
okay,
so I kind of broke it up over 2 days, and I did just because of the circumstances. It was a holiday,
yeah,
and I had some free time on my own, so
yeah,
I was able to watch it in the morning. So
uh,
I was kind of more fresh and alert, I think. And also, I think just in general, I mean, I've joked with friends before that when it comes to watching films and stuff, because
yeah,
obviously I'm an aficionado and
you are.
that I have what I would call a cast iron attention span, and
Right.
that I can probably sit through and maintain my interest through things that would make a normal man shudder and faint.
Yeah,
So I think maybe um,
maybe. Yeah,
Maybe I guess I'm more sort of able to persevere through things like this that aren't modern at all.
yeah,
Because I think this has an extra layer of what would you call it? Something that sort of um, takes away another barrier to accessibility in the fact that not only is it a silent film,
yeah,
but there are also these sections that have been put in with the production stills. So
yeah.
that adds an extra layer of trying the modern viewer's patience in terms of
So,
having to acclimatize to that extra layer
yeah,
of of something that you wouldn't be normally used to when you're watching, just watching a more modern film.
yeah,
So for me, I mean, and I do appreciate that because I guess after the first sort of 10-15 minutes, I guess I just got used to the how it was, the format, and then I just kind of set that aside and just allowed myself to get into it and
right.
just appreciate it on that level.
Yeah,
And I think that's kind of what you have to do when you're seeing things like this. You have to kind
absolutely.
of
Yeah,
appreciate the context of it, and
yeah,
you just have to set aside those things because you can't watch a film from 1924 and expect it to be like a film that was made in 2024. That's just not
yeah, yeah. It's
the way
100
it
years old.
works.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah,
So
yeah, I
you
guess,
have to just sort of go into it sort of with that in your head that you know what you're getting into and you just appreciate it on that level and you put aside those sort of technical things that you're more accustomed to and you just say, okay, I'm going to watch this and just look at the story and look at
yes.
the other aspects of it that I can enjoy. And
Yeah,
that's what
I
you
guess
do.
one thing if I'd done a bit more research, well, I didn't it was only after I'd watched it that I learned that it was the first film shot on location. And
Mm,
I sort of suppose I noticed it was largely a lot of it was, there was lots of street scenes, there was lots of sort of stuff apparently inside this house with the sort of views of the street, but they
mm,
actually were shot in the house on sort of somewhere in San Francisco. I suppose if I'd known that, I would have been a bit more alert to that and sort of enjoying that a bit more rather than just sort of, yeah, it's just a street, it's just a sort of a location which now you take for granted. But of course,
mm,
most of these silent films, well, almost all of them, weren't shot on location at all.
mm,
Even when they were outside, they were sort of in a studio.
mm,
And then perhaps some of the other sort of points about it, I could have done a bit more research into. But I mean, I did enjoy it, and some of the title cards are great as well. There's one note I wrote down, and then for 2 full hours they gorged themselves.
yes.
And there's great title cards because Stroheim was Austrian, so there's a sort of German Austrian sort of strain to it. All these families are sort of German Americans,
Mm,
and so one of them is is a sort of German granny, and she speaks with. Well, I mean, obviously you can't hear it, but it's on the title cards. She speaks with a very sort of strong German accent, which is written very amusingly as well. Which
yeah,
I really
yeah. They
enjoy
use
that.
that for a bit of comic relief, I think, in a few instances, indeed.
Exactly.
And that scene is another manifestation of greed that when they show them eating their dinner, and it becomes quite sort of disgusting, and
Yeah,
as they all gorge themselves on this meal.
yeah. It made me think of Doctor Mr. Creosote slightly. In
Mm.
Monty Python's Meaning of Life.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah.
then I mean, yeah, well, I think it was just I was because I'm sort of getting into the sort of swing of the new year and having
Mm,
been exhausted over at the beginning of the year. I think that's part of the issue, more of the issue than the film. So yeah, there's another thing that's really funny is McTeague. He loves the hymn "Nearer My God to Thee." So there's this joke about that he's sort of that they're asking for music and he's just sort of obsessed with that somehow. And yeah, yeah, there's yeah, it's these faces are great, which you don't get in films now. With these sort of amazing moustaches and
Mm,
as well. Yeah, I mean, I think I would say if somebody's listening to this and think, "Oh, that sounds interesting," maybe start with the edited version, the shorter one.
mm.
Read up a little bit about it as well to find out some of about the innovations and
Yeah, yeah.
the interesting sort of backstory to it, and then launch yourself in, and you might appreciate it a bit more. That's those are my tips.
Well, I would definitely agree that I think this is a film that you shouldn't go into without a bit of kind of knowing what you're getting into and
Yeah.
having that bit of context. And I think you're right too that probably if you've never seen it before, probably seeing that original release version, the 2 hour, 20-minute version is probably the way to go,
Mm.
which gives you the sort of the basic story and
Yeah.
lets you sort of get in. And then if you're really interested, you can pursue that longer
Yeah.
version to get more of an idea of what the original full length cut might have been like.
Yeah.
But I
Absolutely.
think either way, either version that you watch, you are seeing a compromised version because
Sure.
neither one of them is going to be what Stroheim intended in the first place.
Exactly. And one thing I should mention is that the main actor who plays Mac Gibson Gowland, was a British actor. Not
Mm-hmm.
only that, but he was in old, what do you call it? Some of those classics, D.W. Griffith's Intolerance. I think
Yeah,
with old von Stroheim as well. And
yeah.
as
I
you
think
said,
he might have been in Birth of a Nation as well, actually.
yes,
I think he might have been one of the villains in Birth of a Nation.
yeah, and
Yeah.
interesting. He had a sort of life a bit like McTeague because he worked in South Africa prospecting for diamonds and gone to sort of Canada where he was sort of looking for gold, I think, and you know,
Mm.
so he was quite a sort of McTeague type character, which
Yeah.
adds a bit more to the story.
And he was quite physically something. He was a quite big man, wasn't he?
Yeah,
Like a big sort of, and one of the sort of running things through the film is that he's got a bit of a temper, doesn't he? And he's also sort of abnormally strong. So there are various points in the film when those things come into play, don't they?
yeah. What is the funny bits with handshakes? So he sort of like
Mm.
it's got this sort of superhero handshake that sort of crushes your hand. It's amusing. So there's definitely quite a lot of humour in it, as well as
Yeah.
the sort of serious moral point and the sort of you know drama of it. And,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of these things like, and we'll talk a bit more about this in a few minutes when we're talking about Magnificent Ambersons. But this film is one of those where the it's kind of considered like the one of the holy grails of film history. That the idea of being able to find a
mm,
copy
mm,
of the original, sort of longer, or at least one of the longer versions of the film.
yeah,
And there have been over the years rumors about people saying, oh yes, my granddad had a copy of that and we watched it once. I remember, and we watched it over 2 nights, and it was,
right,
so there's all these sort of stories that sort of where someone will say there's still hope that
yeah,
maybe one day a copy of the full length, or at least a longer, more, something more closer to Stroheim's original cut
yeah.
might one day materialize.
That'd be nice,
But
wouldn't
well, it's nice to
it?
know. But because, unfortunately, MGM they had over time they've had quite a few nasty fires that
Uh,
have wiped out a lot of their older library,
I know.
uh, um, and also over time, obviously this old nitrate film's very prone to disintegration and bursting
Right.
into flame and stuff as well. So as the years go on, and now I mean, this film is now 100 years old.
Yeah.
So it is highly, highly unlikely that
Yeah.
something is going to pop up at this point. But having said that, it's not impossible. Nothing's impossible, because even you remember, when was it, about 10 years ago, when they found that the original version of Metropolis,
Yeah.
even though, sometimes there's these
Right in
things
Buenos
sitting
Aires.
around and people
Yeah.
don't know that it's there because maybe it's mislabeled, or it's
Yeah.
been shoved away in a corner somewhere and nobody knows
Yeah.
what's actually in there. So it's not outside the realm of possibility that something may still turn up. But as the
Yeah.
years go by, it's less and less likely, because even if it does, it will probably be in such a dilapidated state at this point that they may or may not be able to do much with it anyway.
Yeah. 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 Well, let's hope. But I'm not holding out any sort of serious consideration for the film turning up. So
No,
this was that Metropolis. Did they find it in Buenos Aires or something like that? Was that the one?
they did indeed. Yeah, they'd found a reduction, a 16 millimeter reduction print that had been made on
So,
from a copy that they had, and
right.
it had like about the 25 minutes of missing footage that
Wow.
people had just presumed was lost forever. And it showed up, and it wasn't in the best of quality, because they basically literally, because they didn't want to keep the old nitrate 35 millimeter film, they literally just did this 16 mil reduction print
Right.
off of the original print, and then just threw the 35 millimeter one away. And then, so all of the scratches and scrapes and everything were basically sort of baked right in there. They couldn't, so when you watch the current Blu-ray,
Yeah.
those scenes, the quality diminishes quite a bit
Well,
from
does it? Okay.
from the other bits, because the quality of it, it was quite badly damaged.
Okay.
But I would say it's still amazing to see it in its full form, and
Yeah.
that sort of, you just have to set those things aside about,
Yeah.
oh, there's some scratches on it, and just sort of appreciate the fact that you're able to see the full film as it was
Mm.
intended. So that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Incredible.
So on that note,
Yeah.
shall we, I don't know, unless there was anything else you wanted to say about Greed.
No, I don't think so. I mean, no, I guess I like the character of Mac, and his wife was less sympathetic. I guess I'd
Hmm.
say that's one of my thoughts.
Well, yeah,
Um,
she becomes ultimately the sort of, quite a tragic figure, doesn't she? And without, again, because we don't want to spoil too many plot points for people who are going to dive in and check it out,
yeah,
but she does become sort of the catalyst for a string of tragedies, and throughout the film, doesn't she? So
yeah,
I think we can leave it at that.
yeah. Let's leave it
And
at that.
but again, I mean, I think I mentioned already, but I think the film is readily available if you want to check it out. All you need to do is Google it, because there's several people who've uploaded a version online on YouTube.
Yeah,
So if you want to watch the original release version, it's easily, you can watch it for free in any
yeah,
number of places. And if you want to see the longer reconstructed version that they did in 1999, it is available to rent or purchase
it is.
on Amazon and Apple TV and YouTube
Yeah,
and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah.
so it's out there, folks, and we do definitely. I think, despite the fact that Jonathan was tired when he
Don't listen
when
to
he
me.
watched them, but it is a really really interesting film, and
Yeah.
worth watching. Even in its truncated form, it's quite amazing.
I'm sure
So
there will be people listening to this thinking, "What an idiot! How can he be so foolish?"
I would not be too hard on yourself, because I'm, even with newer films nowadays, if I try and watch films in the evening,
Yeah,
I struggle. I
yeah,
really do, because it's probably just partly an age thing,
yeah,
and but I do very much struggle sometimes to actually try and get through films. And if they're longer than sort of 2 hours, then I usually nowadays split them up over 2 nights. I just sort of stop them at
Yeah.
a certain point. That seems like a natural breaking point, and I'll just stop and say, okay, I'm going to finish this tomorrow. So, and I have no shame in that now. Like, all the dogmas of my younger sort of, film school days and all that, when it's like, I gotta see it all in one sitting and it's gotta be totally silent and everything's gotta be perfect. And, all that's gone out the window now. I'm perfectly happy to watch things at home in the comfort of my, chair, my armchair in TV. And I'm quite happy to pause them so I can go to the loo
Yeah.
or stop it and say, okay, I'm going to finish this tomorrow because I'm too tired. There's no shame in it. I think what's important is that you actually get, enjoy the experience and get something out of it
Yeah.
rather than sort of
Yeah.
torture yourself.
That's true. That's true. No, I did enjoy it overall. And I might give the shorter version a go next time.
Yeah, definitely. That what I was thinking. I was going to try and get that in before we recorded, but unfortunately, um, it didn't work out in terms of my time, my schedule, and my time and stuff.
Yeah.
But I definitely intend to go back and watch that. And I'm actually quite intrigued to read the book, actually, because I think it's quite an interesting story, and I'd really like to go back and see if I can find a copy of the novel that it was
Yeah.
based on and read that, because I think that would be quite interesting as well.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, well, on that note, shall we move on to
Yes.
Orson Welles? We're going to take a very brief intermission that will, for the listener, will only last a few seconds.
Yep.
So keep your ears peeled because I think you're going to want to know a lot about what we tell you about here. So we'll be right back.
Thanks for listening to the Film Swap podcast. If you like this podcast, please consider giving the show a rating or leaving a review. This helps other listeners find the show. You can follow the Film Swap on social media. We're on Twitter and TikTok at Film Swap UK, on Instagram at Film Swap Media, and on YouTube at Film Swap_podcast, and at Facebook at Film Swap the Podcast.
To learn more, visit our website at filmswap.uk. And we're back. Welcome back, listeners. I hope you enjoyed our little break there, and we do hope that you'll come and say hello to us out in the social media spaces, where we would love to hear from you and let us know what you think of the show, any comments that you have about the films that we talk about, or any of the themes or subjects that we talk about, or any suggestions or anything that you want to talk about, as long as it's film related. We'd love to hear from you. So drop us a line, say hello. And now let's talk about Jonathan's suggestion for a film tonight.
Yes.
Which goes quite well with the film that we have talked about. We're going to be now talking about Orson Welles' 1942 classic, his follow-up to Citizen Kane, The Magnificent Ambersons.
Yeah.
And I'm going to hand it over to Jono to tell us a little bit about Magnificent Ambersons.
So The Magnificent Ambersons was directed by Orson Welles, and it came out in 1942. It was released in 1942, should I say. And this was the year after his first sort of film, which is Citizen Kane, which is commonly regarded, or often regarded, as the best film ever made. It makes loads of polls around the world as the best film. And so, he had a lot riding on his shoulders, and he came up with this, The Magnificent Ambersons. And again, it was chopped down by the studio. But, he didn't hand in a 9-hour epic like Eric von Stroheim. I think the version he handed in was 148 minutes. So and then it was cut down to 88 minutes. But still, it was compromised. and this one it does share some elements that the previous film does. So they're both based on novels, and they're both sort of set in the end of the 19th century in America, I suppose. And they're all about, I suppose, the rise and fall of people's fortunes. And yes, I guess those are the main sort of similarities. And but it's great. It stars Joseph Cotton and Anne Baxter, Dolores Costello. But for me, Joseph Cotton was the most sort of well-known name. But I suppose it has a voiceover from Orson Welles himself.
Yes, he narrates the piece, doesn't he? But he chose not to be in it.
No,
I think primarily because he was too old to play George Winifred, wasn't he? He was too old at this point.
right.
It should be noted that Orson Welles, he loved this novel, the Magnificent Ambersons by, is it Booth Tarkington, isn't it?
Booth
Yes.
Tarkington, yes.
And he absolutely, this was one of his favorite novels, and he had adapted it once before on his radio program, the Mercury Theater on the Air,
Okay,
back in I think 1939. There's a recording
right,
that they did of the Magnificent Ambersons for radio, where he played George,
right.
and it's quite interesting to listen to it. Again, this is something that's freely available. I mean, all the Mercury Theater radio shows are freely available online to listen to now. They're
Right.
all in the public domain. I think there's actually even a website that I think is called something like the Theater of Imagination or something like that, and
Okay.
they've archived all of the radio shows that Orson Welles did
Right.
with the Mercury Theater. And so you can go back and listen to all of these terrific old radio programs. But there's one that they did, an adaptation of the Magnificent Ambersons,
Wow.
and he plays George, and he plays him quite like a real, like sort of like man child, really, like a real kind of sucky baby kind of,
Right.
and his characterization is quite different than the one that you get from Tim Holt in the film, who's a
Okay.
bit more sort of I don't know, shall we say, straight laced and a bit more sort of
Right.
composed
Yes.
um, in his delivery. And I don't think Orson Welles originally necessarily wanted Tim Holt either. I'm not sure if he did or not. I can't
Okay.
remember. But he does seem slightly out of place. Tim Holt was famous more as a cowboy. He was like
Right.
an actor in action Western films of
Okay.
the period. And I think this was an attempt by him to break out of that a little bit
Right.
into a more serious role.
Yeah.
And but anyway, I digress a little bit just to say to the point being that Orson Welles loved this story, and this was one of his kind of first choices of films that he wanted to make when he had the chance. So for
Okay.
him, it's a real passion project,
Right.
and uh, unfortunately, I guess the story goes he was sent down to South America, wasn't he? On because of the Second World War, they wanted to send him as a kind of goodwill ambassador down to Brazil to sort
Okay.
of kind of just do some public relations for the
Okay.
American government
Right.
during the war to make sure that the countries in South America sort of
On side.
stayed on side
Yep.
with the Allies.
Okay.
And while he was down there, it was his understanding that they were still going to allow him to finish editing the film.
Right.
But he'd made some enemies at RKO by this point because he was this famous kind of wonder kid from the radio who had
Yep.
done all these really innovative stage shows and had this really popular program on the radio.
Yep.
The RKO had brought him in and said, "Here, you can do whatever you want, make films for us because you're so amazing."
Yep.
Basically wanted to exploit him.
Yep.
So they brought him in, and then when Citizen Kane was very expensive, it was a bit of seen by some as a kind of a vanity project for him and his mates who were outsiders who'd never made films before, and they suddenly came in and did all this crazy stuff.
Right.
Uh, and then Citizen Kane didn't really deliver commercially,
Okay.
although it was quite highly acclaimed. It didn't really perform, I guess, financially as well as they'd hoped.
Oh,
So by this point, the relationship with him and the studio bosses at RKO were a bit strained.
yeah.
And so then they sent him down to South America on this PR exercise. And he was supposed to be making a film down there as well, which was unfinished, called It's All True, which
All right.
which was sort of like an anthology film based in South America that was telling sort of local sort of folk tales and things, but he never finished it.
Right.
Um, and while he was down there, they basically took the film off of him and decided to cut it down. They thought it was too downbeat.
Right.
They didn't. They just wanted to change it and make it shorter and try to make it more commercial.
Right.
So and then so basically he lost control of it, and the film ended up not not as he intended it. And of course, the rest is history. Really, he became after that his career. He never really worked. He never made another major studio film again.
No.
He did direct some films for American studios again, like maybe Macbeth and The Stranger, and then of course Touch of Evil. But though they were all sort of lower budget sort of
Yeah.
films that weren't, uh, you know, in the same league as Citizen Kane and the Magnificent Ambersons in terms of the
Right.
size of the production.
Yeah.
Right. So I've kind of gone over a little bit of the history of that, is that what happened to the film. So now we can talk a bit more about the story.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, are you going to sum it up?
Well, I can, or you can. Do you want to do it, or I'll do it?
You do it.
Okay, I'll do it. Well, the Magnificent Ambersons tells the story of the Ambersons. They are a grand old family
Yep.
that live in this town. Where are they based? They're
I
somewhere
think
in
it's ever said a Midwestern city.
just Midwestern city, so they don't necessarily specify. That's
No.
why I couldn't really
Yeah. I don't think,
think of it.
even wrecking your memory, I don't think it would work. Nothing would come up.
Yeah. But they are like they have money and
Yep.
status in this community,
Hmm.
and the film is a little bit of a kind of starts out as a nostalgia piece
Yep.
for this bygone era of this this middle class lifestyle of these well-to-do people who spend a lot of time in horses and buggies going to picnics and dressing up and going to being seen out and about town and
Yep.
just enjoying their lives. And then
Yep.
the story centers around Joseph Cotton's character, who was in love with one of the Amberson
Girls.
daughters,
Yep.
and but because of an incident where he got a bit drunk and embarrassed himself and the young lady in question, she ended up going off and marrying somebody else.
Yep.
And so it was sort of like an unfulfilled romance that had happened.
Yep.
And then the film jumps to years later when she's had a child with this man that she married, and he comes back to the town after being away, and he's basically been one of the key players in the rising automobile industry, and
Yep.
he's kind of made his fortune
That's
developing
Joseph Cotton you're talking
automobiles.
about. Joseph
Sorry,
Cotton.
say again?
Joseph Cotton you're talking about now.
Yes, Joseph Cotton's
You said
character.
he
Yes,
comes back. You didn't say who he was, but yeah, it was Joseph Cotton.
yeah. So he's come back, and he's now he's in the automobile industry, and he comes back to sort of set up back in the town, and he's brought his daughter with him,
Yeah.
and his daughter begins a relationship with her son.
Yeah.
They start courting.
Yeah.
But then that's where the all these old animosities and unfulfilled things start to play in, because the aunt, the other Amberson girl, is this sort of what is spinster the right term? She's sort of like
Not
an
just a spinster,
unmarried.
an embittered spinster.
Yeah, she is, and she always had a soft spot for Joseph Cotton's character, but he's obviously not interested in her. He's interested in the sister,
Yeah,
and so she begins to sort of stir up, and maneuver because she was hoping maybe that since he's come back and now he's a widower, that
yeah,
maybe there might be a chance that she might be able to get in with Joseph Cotton and maybe get married to him.
yeah,
But he still has eyes for her sister, and then her husband passes away quite suddenly.
yep,
So then their romance begins to rekindle again, and
yep.
then Agnes Moorehead's character becomes enraged and embittered and starts to, in Machiavellian like, sort of start whispering people's ears and stirring up trouble.
Hmm.
And this is all done with the backdrop of the changing economics of these old families, because now with the automobile and the rise of that technology
Yeah,
and other things, sort of the ramifications for the community are that the Amberson family, their fortunes um, begin to fade, and
you do.
that's kind of how the story goes. It's sort of about the fall of this great family and the fall in their fortunes, basically.
Yes, so they become much less magnificent, don't they?
Yes.
But they were given the opportunity at one stage. They say, why not invest in Joseph Cotton's sort of new business, making tires? That's what he becomes very wealthy from making tires for cars, and they're sort of like,
Mm.
cars aren't going to catch on.
Yes.
It's all about ponies and traps and buggies and things like that.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah. It
ridiculous.
is. It is quite interesting. It catches that transition, doesn't it? The economic transition to this new and kind of industrial revolution, and
Yeah,
how this changes the whole dynamic of this of society, and that's kind of the kind of what the crux of what the story was really meant to be about. But of
yes,
course, in the version that exists now, a lot of that, the kind of the backstory about the sort of the industrial unrest and the changes in the with the companies and the the economics of it, and that all that's the kind of stuff that they jettisoned from the picture. So a lot
right,
of the background of the story that's left, it obviously just focuses on the relationships of the characters.
right.
And then, and I don't know if you agree with this, but I just watched the film again this morning, getting
Yep.
prepared for our conversation today. And it is really striking how that ending that was filmed without Orson Welles' involvement uh, really doesn't fit in with the film. It really feels unnatural and out of place.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if you agree with that, but I've always found that.
Well, I don't think I knew that he hadn't had a part in that. So perhaps I wasn't sort of quite alert to it. But yeah, that's really interesting. But yeah, to me that the I guess I really enjoyed it. And my if I had misgivings about the first film, this one I'm wholly enthusiastic. Apart from it could be longer by 40 minutes or whatever they chopped out.
Yeah.
And it had, great dialogue, amazing performances. And it's
Mm.
funny to think, how much more modern in a way that films are. So it was only, what was it, 26 years after or 16 years after the last Agreed had been made. But this
Mm.
is so much more sort of readily accessible than
Mm.
Agreed. And yeah, good dialogue. The performances, Joseph Cotton is you want to any film with him in, you want to see it basically.
Yeah.
And it's got all the sort of Orson Welles sort of camera, not camera sort of wizardry, funny angles,
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and they're used not just for showiness, but they actually really add to the emotional sort of context of the scenes
Yeah.
and express things, and the amazing lighting that they use, like the sort
Yeah.
of the silhouetting,
Yeah.
and I love that. The one that really struck me today is that great scene when Agnes Moorehead's up on the stairs, up at the, like they have this big huge winding staircase,
Yeah.
and she's kind of up at the top, but they start off down at the bottom, looking at Tim Holt, and I think
Yeah.
is it the uncle, that they're
Right.
having a conversation, and then all of a sudden she comes into the conversation, and they kind of pan up to her, and it's this incredible shot where they're on the different levels of the stairwell,
Right. Yeah.
and I think that but there I thought that scene was really amazing, and a
Mm.
lot of those whispering, angry whispering conversations on the stairwells
Yeah.
that,
Lots
that
of
may give it almost this kind of gothic feel. You can almost feel like it's one of those Italian gothic horror movies from the 60s and stuff,
yeah.
the way that it winds through these staircases and
Yeah.
all the light, the sort of the noir lighting and stuff
Yes, that's
is
true.
very, very modern feeling, and very, incredible. The deep focus photography in that massive set. Apparently, they built this whole mansion
Yeah.
from scratch,
Really.
but they built it so that all the walls could be shifted around,
Wow.
so that they could move the camera in and around to
Wow.
do these incredible tracking shots, like during
Right.
that ballroom scene at the beginning.
Yes. Yes. Well, it's one of the things I wrote down. Amazing set as well.
Yes, indeed.
Because it's, yeah, that staircase is sort of gigantic, really, to think they
Yeah.
built that for the film. And yeah, one of the nice sort of bits of sort of the silhouette and the lighting was there in a back of a, is it a car or a carriage? And I think somebody's going away, and you can see there two people sitting on one side and the sort of silhouette on the other side of the um, carriage, and it just looks sort of very beautiful. And I mean, he was a sort of wizard with the camera, Orson Welles, amongst other things. And yeah, it's terrific, terrific stuff. Yeah.
Mm. Well, it is. I mentioned about the ending and how unnatural it feels
Yeah.
because throughout I mean, the film starts out, like I said, kind of with this kind of nostalgic view of the past, and talking about this grand family and the kind of the society that they lived in.
Yeah.
And then as the film progresses, it becomes darker and goes into this more, into this space and the dynamics between the characters, and especially Agnes Moorehead she, in a sense, almost kind of has a nervous breakdown through the course of the film as she becomes more and more frustrated, and you know is unable to get any satisfaction out of the predicaments that they're in.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden at the end, it has this really, like, everybody all of a sudden it gets wrapped up really nice and tidy and neat, and it seems everybody's all happy, and it all kind of, and it just feels really, really unnatural.
Yeah.
And but interestingly enough, apparently that is more faithful to the novel
Oh, really?
than Orson Welles'
How funny.
version of the ending was.
Wow.
Um,
I'm definitely going to have to look up the radio version if I can download that for free.
yeah, definitely. And I think, again, this is another one of those cases where I'd love to just read the book. I'd love to go back
Mm.
and read Booth Tarkington's novel and just
Yeah.
sort of get more of an idea of the film.
Yeah.
Although it doesn't sound like Orson Welles was necessarily that faithful to it. I think he had
Yeah.
his own sort of,
Yeah.
he obviously related because he came from a sort of a little bit of the kind of the background
Yeah.
that the Ambersons, he came from sort of a kind of a fairly wealthy middle class family like that, and
Yeah.
grew up. And so I think he identified with that in a lot of ways.
Right.
And I think he had his own take on the story and why it meant something to him personally and why he wanted to make the film about it.
Yes, that would make sense
Um,
for that.
and it's quite interesting that, again, like talking about reconstructions like Greed, like it's not, on their current Blu-ray, but Criterion back in the Laserdisc days when
Oh
they
yeah.
released Magnificent Ambersons on Laserdisc, they had a wonderful. I'm trying to remember the name of the chap. Was it Robert Carringer, something like that?
Right.
I apologize if I got that name incorrect, but he did like a really cool. They had a supplement on the disc that had a reconstruction of the film as Wells intended.
Oh really?
And they
Wow.
basically had like pictures from the storyboards, and they
Wow.
sort of went through and they showed he went through and showed you exactly how Wells had intended the film to be,
Right.
and so you can really get a sense of what a really great film it
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
probably
Fascinating. Because I suppose they got the script.
before. Yeah, and now, I mean, like I said, they don't include. I was a bit disappointed when I got the Blu-ray that they have out now that
Right.
they didn't include that old supplement on it
Yeah.
because it was excellent. But I guess Laserdisc was a bit different in that they used sort of still frames like pages of a book, and I don't know how they would necessarily port that over to Blu-ray now.
Right. Okay.
So I guess maybe it was just a technical reason why they couldn't use it.
Yes.
Um, but I think he wrote it. It was basically based on a book that he wrote anyway that did a reconstruction based on the script
Oh really?
anyway.
And what's the guy's name again? Sorry.
Robert Carringer. So I was right. I was right. Robert Carringer was his name,
Right.
and he did this audio commentary on the Criterion Laserdisc in 1986. And I
Okay.
actually remember I had that. It was in this lovely box set. It was a CAV, so there was only half an hour to each side of the disc, and it was a big box set that was lovely, and it had 3 discs in it, and one whole side of it was this
Right.
kind of
I see.
supplement, reconstructing, like showing you what the original version of the film was.
Right, I see. I can see it on the Wikipedia page. The Voyager Company.
Yeah.
It does have some great lines in it as well. One thing that sort of that stuck out that sort of slightly sums up the film. One of the characters says, "Life and money both behave like loose quicksilver in a nest of cracks." Yeah, terrific
It's
line.
beautiful, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
wonderful. There's lots of moments like that, like lots of things. And it should be stressed to people that even though this film is perhaps not how Wells intended it,
hmm.
despite that, it is a really excellent film. It's
Yeah,
still well worth watching,
definitely.
which is one of the, and I feel that way about Greed as well, because I think despite the fact that we know about the history of it, the production history and the fact that the films were compromised, they are still really good films, even in the version that exists
Yep,
for us today.
yep.
And so they are still worth checking out. And the Magnificent Ambersons is great. It's magnificent, and
Haha.
it is a great dream that one day they might stumble across um, some of the excised footage and be able to restore it. There was even just a couple of years ago, I understand there's a chap quite recently who was going to go down to South America because the story goes that at one stage the Robert Weiss, who became a quite an accomplished film director
I am.
of his own, but he was the editor on this
Right.
film, and he sent a work print of the film down to South America to Wells so that he could see
All right.
how the work was progressing.
Right.
And even though someone from RKO had written down to the guys in South America and told them to destroy the print,
Yeah.
they reckon that he might not have destroyed it, like the guy who was assisting Wells, because he was a bit of a film buff, and they don't believe that he actually would have destroyed the film. So they reckon
Ah,
that it got fittered away somewhere, but they don't know if it still survived. And
ah,
apparently, there's been several attempts to try and locate this work print because it
right.
would be the although it wouldn't be the what would have ended up being the finished version,
No.
it would have definitely um, be the closest to what Wells had intended.
Right.
and obviously it would enable them to restore it to his instructions and stuff.
Yeah.
But to this day they haven't found it, and I haven't heard anything more about that. That was just a couple of years ago that I think TCM was going to send someone down
Right.
with a documentary crew, and they were going to do a detailed hunt
Hmm.
to see if they could find this work print version of the film.
Wow.
But I haven't heard anything about that for a while. So one must presume that nothing came of it,
Yeah. That's a shame,
because
isn't it?
otherwise they wouldn't, there wouldn't be a story there if they didn't find
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah. Quite a boring documentary.
Yeah, well, it would be quite anticlimactic if they had this whole thing about
Couldn't
looking
find
for it and they didn't find it. But I always kind of thought, I mean, I don't know what the story is because there were several preview versions of the film that throughout the process of editing the film,
Oh, yeah.
they would go and show it to an audience just to get their reaction. And, one has to wonder what happened to those various preview prints that they used and if
Mm.
any of those somehow survived but again, as the years go by, it becomes less and less likely that um, anything's going to turn out.
Yes.
But I do like in my lifetime, I would love to see this film in its original, you know,
Definitely.
at
Well,
least something closer to Wells' version.
it's still in the 2012 Sight and Sound Critics Poll. It's still got 4 directors' vote as one of their favorite films, including Terence Davies. Thought it was one of his faves. So know, not a that's pretty good vote of confidence, if you ask me.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think it's one of those films that's really great, even as it is,
Yeah,
and it's just even more sort of frustrating to know that, well, actually, this isn't even the whole deal. That
yeah,
there was more to this, and it obviously was quite, had a lot more of complexity and layers to it in the
yes,
version that Wells intended. That it would have been an even greater film, I think.
yeah,
Just about the change, and you know
yeah,
at that early part of the 20th century and stuff. So it's quite, I think, significant in its
yeah. It's funny that both of them like a sort of transition from in Greed. There's a transition from the sort of slightly the Wild West of sort of being an apprentice to a dentist to the
mm,
sort of more formal qualifications necessary. And in this one, there's a sort of transition from horse-drawn vehicles to the motor for the horse to the horseless carriage, which becomes known as the car. And they both that the theme of both films. Uh,
mm,
but incidentally, did you see there was a remake in 2002,
yes.
directed by Alfonso Arau? I think that's how you pronounce it. I mean,
So
it's not going to be Orson Welles, but it might have those sort of missing elements, which are sort of interesting to see how they
well,
handle all that stuff.
I haven't seen it, but my understanding of it is that because originally the idea that it was supposed to be shot to Wells' specifications, and it was supposed to essentially be a remake, but using Wells'
Okay,
intentions. But apparently, in the end, they did deviate from that, and they still used the ending
right.
that's more faithful to the book rather than the ending that Wells had intended,
Okay,
which would have been a little bit more downbeat
right.
and but maybe perhaps a little bit more authentic and
Okay,
made more sense within the
yeah,
context of what had preceded it.
yeah,
So yeah, I've never seen that, and I don't know, like, I don't know how easy it would be to see that now. I mean, that's what, like a good 20 years ago now, wasn't it? So
yes, 22.
and
Yeah,
I'm not aware of, I've never sort of seriously sought it out, but I don't know how easy it would be to see that if it was
Yeah.
available
It'd
somewhere to
definitely
watch.
be worth a look because it's used. Yeah, it says used his original screenplay and editing notes. So,
Mm.
yeah, I mean, if you're interested in the film, I think, I would definitely watch it.
Well, it's got a good cast. I think if I remember correctly, it's got fairly notable cast in it, and it probably, I mean, because it would probably be a good thing to watch. Yeah, but I don't think I've just never actively sought it out. I
Hmm.
think if it fell in front of me and I had an opportunity to watch it, I might check it out.
Yeah.
But I've not had a chance to see it. Maybe one day.
Yeah, maybe one day. Yeah, I guess it's one of those things. If you search for it using a search engine, it's the the Alfonso Arau version is not the one that's going to come at the top of the search results, is it?
No, no, and I think that's indicative. I mean, I think it's maybe indicative of how it turned out too. I mean, I think it's obviously not something that people are still talking about and saying, "Oh, you got to see this; it's so good," kind of thing. It's just kind of
No.
come and gone, and it's not really
Yeah.
something that people are that interested in. So I think that maybe might. I mean, I'm just assuming that that might be indicative
Yeah. It's probably
of
not going to make
something.
any sight and sound sort of director's
No,
polls, is it?
exactly, exactly. But I'm sure it would be interesting seeing, like I said, if I stumbled upon it
Yeah.
at some point and I had an opportunity to watch it, I might check it out
Yeah.
because just out of interest sake. It wouldn't be the first time that I've sat through things just out of interest sake, and there's
Absolutely.
something to be said for that.
Definitely.
Um, I mean, Jonathan, how did you watch the Magnificent Ambersons?
I,
Because
yes, I watched it on the BBC iPlayer because they had
okay,
bought an enormous sort of archive of RKO films.
yes,
Um,
yes, that's how you saw she wore a yellow ribbon as well,
exactly.
if I remember.
So
Because
I mean,
I
most.
don't know what it is, but there's a lot of those older RKO films. I think BBC must have,
Oh dear.
when they got the rights to them, they must have got them in perpetuity
Oh, okay.
because they've been showing those films for years, and now they have them on their streaming service. And but what's interesting is that
Yeah.
the masters that they use are obviously not the most up to date.
Okay.
You know, you know, they're not fully remastered up to current standards. They're kind
Yeah.
of obviously older
Yeah.
transfers from older prints,
Yeah.
and they're maybe not up
Yeah.
to the this kind of standards that we're used to now in the days of
Right.
high definition and 4K and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think it might be a case where the BBC had the rights in perpetuity for those films, but they only with the existing copies that they have,
Right.
so to speak.
Right.
So they would actually have to, because I think Warner Brothers is now the current rights holders for a
Are
lot
they?
of the RKO library.
Okay.
So I think they would have to, uh, work out some sort of arrangement with them in order to improve the copies that they have.
Yeah.
Um,
That makes
but
sense.
anyway, but that is, I mean, it's there to watch for free, so you can't sneeze at that.
Definitely. Absolutely.
So
That's
it's definitely worth checking out. And I would obviously draw like the preferred way to watch it would be right here on the Criterion current Blu-ray edition, which
beautiful.
is this beautiful sort of digipack thing that comes with a lovely book
Yeah.
all about the film. You'll see that the disc isn't in it at the minute because it's actually still in my Blu-ray player in the front room because I was watching it this morning and I forgot to take it out. So it's not in the package, but I would definitely recommend this. It's from a new 4K restoration that they did just a few years ago.
Right.
And it absolutely looks beautiful. And it's a lovely little package, like I say, with a lovely book.
Yeah.
And there's all kinds of additional features on here. It does have the radio adaptation, the earlier one that I mentioned. But like I said, you don't need to buy this to listen to that. It's
No.
freely available online. You just have to Google it. There's a segment from a 1925 silent adaptation. So there was a previous film version before Welles made it.
Right.
There's interviews with Welles, with Peter Bogdanovich talking about it. There is commentaries by Robert L. Carringer,
Right.
James Nairmore, and critic Jonathan Rosenbaum. So there's interviews with Simon Callow and Joseph McBride. So along with the film, you get loads and loads of contextual
Yeah.
supplements to further enhance the experience of watching the film. So I would definitely recommend that you
Get a copy of that.
go and get yourself a copy of that because it's brilliant.
It sounds like the definitive edition.
Yeah, definitely. It's beautiful. It is a really lovely transfer of the film, and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It looked beautiful.
I mean, old
So
Criterion, they know what they're doing, don't they?
yeah, they still knock it out of the park every once in a while. They still do. I mean, there's lots of other labels now that have kind of sort of muscled in on their turf,
Right.
and put out a lot of really great editions of films and stuff. But Criterion still, um, they obviously love the films and put a lot of care and attention into the releases that they do. So
Definitely.
definitely worth checking that out. And Magnificent Ambersons, I think, is available from Criterion in the UK, so you don't have to pay for an expensive import. You can actually buy a domestic release here in the UK, so
That's good.
it's not expensive or anything like because a lot of Criterion stuff you have to import it from America, and that can be quite a pricey thing for collectors and things to do that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I think lots of their stuff is just in region 1, isn't it? You have to.
it is, yeah. Well, I mean, they started. They've got some kind of a distribution arrangement in the UK now, so they do release things here.
Yeah.
So which is great. So you can get hold of their stuff without, like I say, having to spend a fortune importing them, which never used to be so bad. But once the whole Brexit thing happened, then
Yeah.
it just became way too cost prohibitive to import stuff from the States. So
Right.
it used to be, it maybe they would be a few quid more, but now it's
A
just
lot more.
not. Yeah, it's just not viable.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, it's a shame, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
So anyway, Jonathan,
Yes.
do you have anything else you wanted to say about Magnificent Ambersons?
No, I really enjoyed it. I would definitely watch it again because it's only 80 minutes or 83 minutes long, which isn't that long.
Yeah,
So
it's not very long.
no, it's not. It's yeah. So, and I guess great film, and I would watch it again. Not just watch it again, but I watch it again soon. Is what I mean.
Yeah,
So yeah,
definitely. It is one of those films that I think I watch it fairly regularly. I would say every year or two,
yeah,
it ends up in my player.
yeah,
And there's only really sort of maybe a few dozen films that I could say that
right,
I kind of like fancy watching them
yeah,
fairly regularly and get them. So it's definitely just one of those really great films that you should see. If you've never seen it, you definitely want to go and check it out.
yeah.
And if you haven't seen it for a while, you want to go check it out. And even if you saw it yesterday, you should go and check it
Yeah,
out.
yeah, absolutely.
It's that good. It's
Yes,
that good.
it is. It is.
Right. So on that note, shall we call it a day? Because we certainly don't want to end up with any great big 8-hour epic podcast and then have someone take it away from us and edit it down on us.
No, that would be annoying. Wouldn't be magnificent, would it?
No, that wouldn't be. No, no. And we actually want to save our listeners' ears because
Yes.
I'll tell you why. Because our next episode, all being well, of course, we don't want to make any firm commitments here because, as we found last year on a couple of occasions, the best laid plans mice and men, as it goes from the old Steinbeck there.
Yep.
That sometimes things don't quite go to plan. But as it stands right now, our next episode, if you're a film buff, you are definitely going to want to tune back in and listen to us next time, because we've got some really, really interesting topics and guests coming up.
We do.
And I can assure you now is a great time to hit that follow button, or if you're watching us on YouTube, to hit that subscribe button. And however you find us, now is the time to make sure that you don't miss out on anything, because we got some really, really interesting stuff coming up over the next sort of month or so.
Yep.
And going on even beyond that, I suspect, Jonathan.
Definitely. Well, beyond that.
So, Jonathan, it's been good to see you, because we've had a few weeks off, so it's been nice to get back into the Film Swap saddle.
Yes.
And start talking about some great films again.
Yep.
And listeners, thank you very much, wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining us. And, there's quite a lot of nasty business and stuff going on right now. So wherever you are, please take care of yourself. And hopefully you're getting a chance to watch lots of great films. And
yes,
we hope to that you'll come back and join us again in a couple of weeks, because we'll be back with some more film swap action.
Absolutely.
All right. So please take care, and we'll see you soon.
See you soon. Bye.
All the things these nerdy middle-aged men get up to.